Okay.
Go for it.
Hopefully it's a one-take deal this time. Well, probably not. Welcome back to episode... Oh, you've interrupted me.
Sorry.
Let me clear my throat, prepare myself. Welcome back to episode 3 of Politically Hopeless. Isn't that what it's called? Yeah. Oh, my goodness.
I think so. That's fine.
Yeah.
Leave that in. You're good.
Okay, we'll go with that. Welcome back to episode 3 of Politically Hopeless. If you missed the first 2 episodes, me and Ollie discussed, does the UK still have free speech? And are the judiciary, our judges, overruling democracy? And this week we're going to answer the question, has free market capitalism failed the UK? So we're going to be chatting about all things economics. How was your Christmas?
Fine, uneventful, really.
Get any nice presents?
Not really. I got given 2 mugs that the contractors gave us with the contractors' logo on. That's basically
that's
it. But tomorrow,
very good.
I'm going to go and buy a pallet of fence posts and 8 rolls of wire, which will be expensive, and my dad's paying for that, so that can be my Christmas present.
That is remarkably unexciting. I got myself a Remarkable 2, speaking of remarkably, which is basically just a notepad, but it's electronic. So I am going to destroy you this week because I now have notes.
I dated a girl who did maths at uni, and she had one of those for doing maths on.
Wow, she sounds exciting as well. It didn't work out then?
No, I dumped her for someone else, which in hindsight was the wrong decision, but we all make mistakes.
We all make mistakes, right. So where are we going to start this week?
Well, I thought it'd be fun to let everyone know where we stand politically this week with a political compass test. And we found one that puts us relative to parties that exist currently in the UK. It's put me slightly more... Well, that says unionist and nationalist. Wow, it's so interesting that they have different indices.
You're basically...
Axes.
You're basically in line with the Labour Party. Slightly more progressive, but on right and left, you're in line with the Labour Party, which I would argue is spot on for you, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that is about correct. Yeah. Where did you stand?
And for me, it has put me quite far off to the right. Not far right, just far off to the right, and also labelled me as quite deeply conservative. So I am basically an ideal reform voter, according to this political compass, which again, to be perfectly honest, I would say is remarkably accurate.
Do you think? See, I always think these things are a little bit reductive because, I mean, if you... Like, any political party has different people within it. I mean, you have yourself said that reform is not just Nigel Farage, but, I mean, within the Labour Party, you have characters like Lord Glasman. Like, Lord Glasman, I think, more or less agrees with you on everything. And then you also have characters like John McDonnell. So just to have Labour as a point...
but it's an average. It's an average. And that's why there's lots of questions. And to be honest, I think I would have been further to the right of reform. Only the questions about trains saved me. I want to nationalise the rail service. And
well, that's just it. But we're talking about economics today. So maybe we will find some agreement on this. You can...
yes. Well, let's move on to the question at hand then, which I'm not even sure if we're going to disagree on this. I have no idea what your opinion is on the free market, but do you want to start with an opening statement, sort of give me an idea of where your starting position is?
Right, well, I'm hoping that this will be sort of a more conceptual episode, so I'm just riffing and I'm not reading something off a piece of paper that I prepared, but I think that profit as a motive, as sort of the engine of the economy, if you like, is completely reasonable. It's very, very effective. There is interesting stuff that algorithms could potentially be as efficient as the market at allocating resources in the future. We could look at that, but I think at the moment we haven't got a better sort of driving force than the profit incentive. However, there is such a thing as market failure.
There's always a however.
Yes, but things are complicated, aren't they? And so I think that it needs to be regulated very heavily in order to make it work well, essentially. So I don't believe in the free market. But I'm going to take that even a step further and say that I don't think most people who say they believe in a free market actually believe in a free market. I think they just want to empower the rich to get richer and hide behind
right away,
the phrase
before I even give an opening statement, you have massively contradicted yourself here. You
Have I?
can't say you're a fan of the free market and then use the same phrase regulated heavily.
No, I didn't say I was a fan of the free market. I said I think profit as a motive is a good thing. So
So you're
I would
not a
take the sort
fan.
of, if you like, a state capitalist model, which I also a social democratic or socialist model, depending on how you use those terms, where you have Britain after the Second World War, you have a capitalist sort of model to drive the economy, but then it's heavily regulated and you have lots of redistribution going on at the same time,
So
just to
you're a
sort of level the playing
communist.
fields. No, I'm not a communist. I'm a social democrat. You don't think I'm a communist?
Oh, no, I don't. No, I don't. Right. I don't understand your position, to be perfectly honest, but I suppose that's the point of this discussion,
Well, no,
is
I
we'll get
believe,
there.
just to put it in different terms. Then, like I believe in like businesses and work and such, and people can be taxed on those, and then that tax will fund stuff that makes everyone's life better. So, like the NHS, for example, and that is an intervention by the government uh, against the free market, but that makes everyone's life better. But the NHS is fundamentally powered by
Makes
capitalism,
everyone's life better. Okay.
in that
That sounds
capitalism
very
is the thing
communisty.
that's taxed. Yeah, it
Yeah,
is.
okay.
Yeah, people, they're dirty commies trying to make people's lives better. I resent them for that.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. Right. Well, my position is actually much simpler, which is
Okay.
that I believe that all bureaucracy and government past a certain point is detrimental to people's wealth, and that free market capitalism is the reason why we have the living standards we have in the West. And it is not a coincidence that the rest of the world has adopted the model, if you like, which Britain and the UK actually invented. Is that
But
clear?
yes. Oh, I'm sure if I knew slightly more about late 18th century economics, we could unpick that. But I don't know that much about it.
Essentially, it is about what is actually going to motivate people, and it's their inherent selfishness. That's what drives people and motivates people. But a rising tide lifts all ships. So, whilst inequality under the capitalist free market system does tend to increase, everyone is fundamentally better off.
Yeah, you see, I think that allowing it, it's sort of like driving a car in a sense, in that, like, if it's going really well, you can sort of take your foot off the gas, sound like an American, and coast for a little bit, which is sort of deregulating, the car's sort of driving itself, but then also it can get too unequal, and then you sort of introduce more regulations, which is this kind of like cyclical thing that I think you can see through history, where you have liberalism in the 1930s, say, where you have a very unequal society and everything's pretty rubbish. But then you have socialism after the Second World War, and then that sort of goes so well, and everyone's sort of like fairly equal, that they go, well, this is kind of nonsense. Let's just get rid of it. And then you have Thatcherism, and then that doesn't really work, as we see past
So
2008. And then
you're assigning the boom, if you like, after the Second World War to social policies, whereas I would argue that it was the liberalization of economic policies and
well,
the
after
opening
the
up of
Second World
trade
War,
across, yeah, globally.
yeah, well, globally, yeah,
Yeah.
possibly. I've not thought
You know,
about that.
I don't think the creation of the NHS or subsidies for farmers had a big impact on growth, like their social policies. But
No, no,
what
you
did
could
have
no.
a big impact?
I think they possibly did, because subsidizing food, for example, is a very good way of redistributing wealth. Because if poor people can afford food, they spend their disposable income more than rich people do. Because if you give a rich person 20 quid, they'll just put it in the bank and not spend it. Whereas if you give a poor person 20 quid, they'll immediately go out and buy more food. So helping poor people helps the economy go. Trickle down economics doesn't really work. I
Yes, a
don't believe in
true
that.
Labour voter. A true Labour voter. Well, perhaps
No,
at the
no,
very
no.
start of this, I would also like to take a minute to define free market capitalism, because I didn't actually know what it meant. I'd heard the word, but I didn't know what it meant. So
Yeah, that
basically,
surprised me.
it's yeah, no, I'd heard the word, but I never looked into it. I'm not an Oxford history
What?
graduate. I don't have all day to read these sort of things.
Yeah.
But I, what it's summarized down to is the right to own private property, voluntary exchange of goods, so not government intervention, priced on supply and demand, so no fixing of prices, which used to be very common in the early 1900s and 1800s, trying to control inflation, competition. is what is in theory meant to reduce prices. If you don't have the government dictating controls, it is competition, which is meant to regulate the market. And the final point is what I've been saying, limited government intervention. So essentially, if you want a free market, you have to have limited government intervention, which is very much my stance on this, and what I will be trying to convince Ollie of over the next hour or so.
Yeah. Well, you see, the problem, I sort of agree with you on paper, right? In that,
Good.
like, if you have a perfectly functioning market where you have, low barriers to entry and you have perfect competition, the competition will mean that the companies that produce the best goods or the cheapest goods will win, and then people get those cheap good goods, and this is all very wonderful, etc. The problem with it is that it's kind of cyclical, because if you're in that situation, the best company will then buy out the worst companies who will be out competed and go bankrupt, and then you end up with a monopoly, and then you no longer have the competition, then you no longer have the sort of price competition that's keeping things affordable for consumers, and then the prices start to go up, and then everything just gets kind of worse again. So you have to deal, I think, pragmatically perhaps with this kind of cyclical tendency that, like, liberal capitalism sort of works very well
Okay.
for a bit, and then stops working
So
quite so well
this
after a
is
while.
good. This is good. I think we have some agreement straight away. Okay. So you,
Good.
like me, agree with the paper theory, the principle of free market capitalism. But like me, I agree with you. The issue is when that stops functioning properly. Is that
Yes.
fair to say? Right. So
Yeah, I
then
think
we're at
if
the
a
point
market
of
functions without needing to be interfered with, you can leave it. But that doesn't very often
yes.
happen.
So then it's what is the solution to making sure it functions properly? Okay. Now I know what you're going to say already. You're going to say, well, we need the government, we need the state to step in and make sure it is functioning properly. I am going to argue, and I am going to convince you of this. I'm
Oh,
confident
yeah.
that the reason why it is not functioning properly is because of government intervention.
Okay,
Is
that
that
is
a
bold.
sensible place to move the debate to? Because
You
that's what
can
we actually disagree on.
lead me, please.
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to give you some examples, right? Because I love real life examples because it's all one sided in this case. Okay. So what I'm trying to show you here is that government intervention and government control has made the situation worse and made living
Mm.
standards worse. So the most obvious example, if I flip to the next page on my tablet, okay, is East and West Germany. Okay, it's the classic example. West Germany had free market capitalism. East Germany had communism. You would have loved to live in East Germany, but unfortunately, it didn't
That's a little
work.
bit reductive in that West Germany was pumped full of money by the Americans to prove a point.
Capital
It's a bit
inflow
like
is
that's a bit like
capital
saying,
inflow is not really, because capital inflow is one of the key metrics of a successful free market economy. A great example
okay,
of capital inflow is actually Ireland in the 90s. In the 90s, Ireland deregulated, lowered tax, and they achieved massive growth and massive capital inflow, which led Ireland going from one of the poorest countries in Europe to one of the richest. Lesson there from Ireland:
yeah, but
deregulation increases money. There's more
yeah, but
examples, don't worry, you're going to love this one.
we've sort of slightly removed it from the sort of theoretical market that we just imagined and discussed, because the things that you're saying there are true as anecdotes, but the reason, like in Ireland's case, that it worked very well is because they had deregulated relative to other countries, which meant that companies could just move their head office to Ireland, pay less tax, and then Ireland suddenly had loads of companies headquarters
Yep,
there, right?
100%.
Yeah, but
100%.
that's not just that isn't the structure of a market generating wealth. That's
Okay.
just
Well,
Ireland stealing loads of
let me give you
bosses.
another great example. The
You could
UK, you're going
you
to
could
love
do the
this one.
Germany
You're
one.
going to love
You
this
never
one.
finished that.
Sorry, what about the Germany one?
You said
That is
oh
once the East got freedom from the Soviet communist nonsense and they got free market capitalism, East Germany seen the highest growth rates and highest living standards improvements by far in the entirety of Europe for like the next 20 years. Again, reinforces the point.
Okay,
Another great one, right? This is a good
it's
one
really
because I
good.
know
Yeah.
you love Margaret Thatcher, right? I know you love Margaret Thatcher. So when you mentioned Margaret Thatcher before in a previous episode, I didn't actually know a lot about why she took the policy decisions she did, okay? I didn't understand it enough. So I've done a lot of research on it. And it turns out that before Margaret Thatcher took office in 1979, we had a Labour government enforcing the kind of policies you would love. But
Mm.
UK growth was abysmal during that period. I have a few figures here. In the 1970s to 1980s, UK growth was 1.6%, compared to American growth sitting at 2.9% and German growth sitting at 4%. Okay. Margaret Thatcher in the 80s, she was Prime Minister for 11 years. I didn't even know that. And UK growth increased to 2.6%. The US was 3% and Germany was 1.6%. So you can see what happened when someone put in place true free market economics. Growth improved relative to our peers, and they fixed the problems from a government beforehand which was trying to intervene and nationalize everything. What do you think of that example?
Well, like it's sort of literally true, but I would caveat it by saying, in the long run, that isn't really quite what happened. So, I mean, as I think Macmillan, of course, you suggest that it's sort of Labour Party with the government before, but it was sort of the post-war consensus that had been maintained also by the Conservatives, who by the time Thatcher got into office was faltering under the sort of various strange it was under. Britain was the sick man of Europe and all that kind of stuff. But what Thatcher kind of did was, in the words of Macmillan, sell off the like family silver, right? So if you take like the nationalised water companies or the nationalised railways or just the social housing or whatever, and you sell it, you get growth because you suddenly have private profit incentives being taken into stuff, and um, they can make lots of money, and that's good for the economy in the short run. But then what happens in the long run is it becomes worse for the economy because you end up with foreign national energy companies owning all your infrastructure, as is the case with EDF. And then because it's a monopoly, in that you can't really choose who you buy water from, they just jack the price up. The service they provide
Yeah,
is
but
crap. They fill all of the rivers with sewage when they should be cleaning it, and everyone suffers, right? So in the long run, it's probably
yeah,
not
but you
good
have
for
a big
the
problem.
country or the economy.
You have a big problem there, which was that the 90s and the early 2000s, before the economic crash, were probably the best 2 decades for the UK. Under Tony Blair, the UK was growing at a faster rate than most other economies across the world. And it's
Yeah, but
only
this is
really
right. But
been,
this is the cyclical thing, right? So you could take the point that everything had kind of got stale in the just before Thatcher in the 1970s. And
yeah,
then, like, she sold off the water company. Suddenly, you have a profit incentive, operating behind all this infrastructure. You get growth because they're pursuing growth. That's all fine. But then you get to the present, and it's not really working anymore, right? And people are looking at it
yeah,
thinking
but why?
the
Yeah, but
value for
why is
money
it
is
not
crap. They're
working?
polluting because it's
Yeah, but
not
why is it not
regulated
working?
enough. Because
No,
they
no, no, no. That is not clearly not the answer. Look at today in 2025, okay?
No,
You
no,
can
stick with water.
compare,
Stick with water because this helps illustrate my point, right? The problem is that with
right?
things like water, you can't really have a healthy market because you almost inherently have a monopoly of selling. Like you could have two different water companies, but they can't really compete with each other because they would have to be like laying different pipes or whatever to whoever
Yeah, but the
decided
water,
to be
the
a new customer. Like it's just not going to work. So they can almost there's like an inherent market failure in the water
yes,
market, which is why it should be nationalized or at least extremely
I
heavily
could, I
regulated.
could, I could agree to that. I could agree to that,
Okay,
hundred
that's good.
percent.
I just wanted to
The
finish that point before you dive off
No, that's
somewhere
okay.
else.
There is certain industries which absolutely sit outside of what the free market will be able to deal with. Water is a
Mm,
good example. Healthcare could well be a very good example. Defense is a great example. Infrastructure is a great example. Okay. I am not
mm,
advocating that everything has to be sold off nationalized or not like sold off and denationalized. Okay, some stuff definitely should remain within government, but I want to convince you of an issue which is stagnating our economy, which is that people have tried to overregulate everything. Okay. And a really great example is just in 2025, the German economy is forecast to grow by 0.2%. The UK economy is forecast to grow by 1.4%. And the American economy is growing at 3.8%. And why is that happening? It's because they have cheap energy and deregulation. And Europe is killing itself and killing our economy through overregulation, which is built over decades. We are no longer a free market economy in Europe and the UK.
Well, we're freer than we were before Thatcher.
No, we're
I would
not.
say. It's more free
Well, okay,
market.
that's
I'm not saying no. I'd argue it's a worse country, but
yeah.
it's more free market.
Okay, you're maybe right than in the 70s, but what about, are we as free a market as we were in the 90s or early 2000s when Europe was actually still able to kind of keep up with the rest of the world?
I think that's a very negative characterization of Europe. I think Europe does keep up with the rest of the world, but I
No, we
don't know.
don't. No, we
Is it?
don't. Not even close. Europe is a disaster. Our share of GDP relative to the rest of the world has been collapsing for the last 30 years. And fundamentally, that means all of us are poor. Like our generation will be the first generation that lives in Western Europe in a very, very long time who is going to be worse off than our parents.
That is a different conversation that I would love to have with you.
But why is that happening? Why is that happening? You have to link the two. It's happening because our energy is so expensive. We don't have tech companies. We don't have industry anymore, and it's so expensive because of overregulation and nonsense. You can't frack in this country. You can't drill for oil. Like you have to build flipping wind turbines,
Yeah,
which
but
get so much funding from a
so,
regulated market. It's basically a scam. It's overregulation distorting a free market. If we had a free market in the energy sector, a true free market, I would be paying 7 pence a kilowatt. But because we don't, I'm paying 24 pence.
yeah, but it's just a little bit more complicated than that. I fear
Is it?
because again you have the cyclical thing, which is that like in the short, I'm sure you're right in the immediate term on some level. However, if we just completely abandon all attempts to fight climate change, which is fundamentally what these regulations are for, then conceivably in the long run that would make things worse for everybody.
No,
And
no, it wouldn't. No, it wouldn't, because the rest of the world doesn't give two hoots about the carbon nonsense. Like if you look at the graphs of carbon emissions, China is pumping out. I think it is.
yeah,
If
but
UK reached net
it
zero, we
does
would make
it
up for
doesn't then.
4 days of China's emissions. If the UK was net zero, we would
Yeah, but
cover
China
four
has
days of
more
China's
people
emissions.
than we do, which means that the two are not necessarily
Yeah,
directly
but why are
compatible.
we sacrificing ourselves, right? Why are we sacrificing ourselves for the benefit of people in different
Yeah, but it doesn't
countries?
have to be necessarily sacrificial if
Yes,
we
it does,
become
because the whole
independent.
green
We're
growth
talking
thing,
about
the
energy
green growth
production
thing
now.
didn't work.
No,
Yes, but it's
you like
overregulation. It's a departure from the free market. That is
no.
blatantly
Okay,
obvious how
okay,
it's
okay.
linked.
Right. These are all issues that we will discuss, but I'm going to try and keep it sort of more conceptual on the free market. Do
No,
you
not conceptual,
perceive?
real
No, no,
life.
no, no. Do you perceive that the situation you just described is something that has emerged over the past few decades because of an increase in regulation?
Yes,
Yeah, and there is one example of this
100%.
actually that I've thought of, which is that if you take the railways, like before the sort of 1920s, when they were sort of grouped into the big four, the railways were built by private enterprise, including some very impressive ones like the Great Central Railway. And then they sort of got essentially, I think, run into the ground by the government in the First World War, and then again in the Second World War, which is what led them to being nationalised. But then they were dismantled by the government, which I think was wrong, and we probably agree on that. But interestingly, the Great Central Railway was the most modern railway that we had before HS2. And a private company has put proposals in to reopen it using their money to move lorries around, essentially, which would then help drivers by taking lorries off the road. And the government have just said no to it, which I just think is crazy.
Yeah, but that's
Because
overregulation. That's
yeah, but like
overregulation. We
the thing is
agree.
that like yeah, in that situation, you have a private company which obviously originally built the railways, then saying, "Oh, we'll build them again. This is national
You
infrastructure that we'll just
cannot,
create,"
you
and the
cannot
government say
build
no.
anything. You can't build anything in this country. There's so many examples of this. A really good example, another really good example on energy, but it's on infrastructure, is that the UK is building a new nuclear power station at the minute. Okay, Hinkley Point C.
Well,
And it was
China and the
estimated
French are building it for us, I think.
the French are building it through their nationalized EDF energy
Yeah,
industry, right?
yeah.
But
Good.
it
So our
was
bills are supporting them.
estimated to cost 19 billion. Do you know how much it's currently projected to cost?
It's going to be much.
48
Yeah,
billion.
yeah.
48, but it'll be the most expensive nuclear power plant in the entire world by far. And why is it so expensive? Right? It's so expensive because they couldn't just take the plants built in France. They had to totally change the design, 5,000 design changes to comply with UK regulations. The French have been building these power stations for decades, and the bureaucracy and nonsense of the UK government has bumped up the cost to 48 billion. Again, it's over regulation. That is the big problem. We are not a free market economy.
Yeah, okay. So I think we agree that like certain market structures, like utilities, shouldn't be free market because it just doesn't really work. And then
Energy should. Energy
yeah,
should.
yeah, but that's a different type of market. I feel I agree with you that in some instances the regulation stifles productivity. I mean, we see this in lots of things. I mean, you have this sort of inheritance tax issue for farmers, which has stopped people investing. Government interference in the free market is therefore harming the economy. That happens, and the power plant thing. I take. I'm not sure
Yeah.
I'd agree necessarily with the terms of your um, line on the energy, and that I think we should be trying to steer away from polluting
Yeah,
things.
but so the carbon thing, right? Why do we not just leave the market, the free market, to decide if wind turbines are so fantastic, they'll still make economic sense? And actually, offshore wind does still make economic sense. It still would be built
Because
without the government fraud.
market failure is the risk, you see. I
No, it's
think.
not market failure. It's not market failure. If the
Well, it is because
technology is not,
if yeah, but the market doesn't care about climate change necessarily. So if the cheapest thing to do is to destroy the
yes,
planet, which in most instances it is,
yeah, but it's
then
not. It's not. China is adding more solar than the rest of the world combined every year. And it is an astonishing rate they're adding solar. Why are they adding solar? Look up the graph, I'll put it on screen, right? Because it's genuinely astonishing. They're adding solar because it is now cheaper to produce energy from solar than it is from fossil fuels. So that is an example where China has not had to destroy their entire population through overregulation. Instead, they let the market catch up to the point where the renewable technology was cheap enough. The approach that we have taken in the UK with that Muppet Ed Miliband is to offer companies insane deals to build renewables, which we're now fixed into for 20 years. And what it amounts to is stealth taxes by government. It is a stealth tax through our energy bill, and they were hoping that that would stimulate economic growth. But in reality, it hasn't worked because their stealth
why?
tax through energy has destroyed our industries.
Yeah,
The
but you
stealth
said that it
tax through
makes
energy
economic
has,
sense, like in China, to do solar. Would
yeah,
that not apply here? What's the difference?
it would, but we could, the companies that are putting it in are still getting the rock payments, which are just a stealth tax. So it makes so much sense now that it's a complete scam. Wind turbines are a complete scam in this country. It's not the free market. It's totally artificially created. AD plants are my favourite example here in Northern Ireland. They are getting paid over 40 pence per kilowatt hour to produce not green electric. A plant, and like a small AD plant at the minute, is like generating £750,000 profit every year. And they are in no way green. Total market manipulation and failure. If it was left to the free market, every single AD plant would be out of business tomorrow. And they should be.
Okay, so
Do you see what I'm trying to say? Do you see
no,
my
I
point?
get.
Like, we do not. Yeah.
I mean, we could talk about energy in another episode, but like on a sort of like market function level,
Yes.
I do take the point, and I guess maybe a sort of corollary of this is stuff like the natural capital markets, which I imagine we both think is ridiculous. But what happens there, or what could happen there, or like carbon credits say, is that the government
Yeah.
can sort of artificially create a market where they could
did.
like somehow quantify the amount of wildlife in a place, and they can say this has this value, and you can trade that value. There you go, and so it's like an artificial, like it's a market
That
about
already
something that doesn't
exists.
actually
That's called
exist.
the ETS scheme. The
ETS
emissions
scheme.
trading scheme. The
Yeah, well,
emissions
yeah, like a
trading
carbon
scheme.
credit thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So
What do we
basically,
think of that?
the emissions trading scheme. Basically, if I own a coal-powered plant, right, I have to buy these carbon credits, so I'm allowed to produce energy using coal. And then
Yeah.
the renewable companies, the guys with their wind turbines, they then get paid for their renewable credits. Okay. So it's a market where the dirty power generators like natural gas are paying extra money, but the renewables are then taking that money. And why is that such a smart idea for a government? It's a smart idea for a government because they then subsidize renewable energy through raising everyone's electric price. Because the guys who produce cheap energy have to pay the guys who produce expensive energy, and it's all of us plebs, all of the public, that end up paying this huge stealth tax to fund it. So the government doesn't have to make a big announcement about tax rises. Instead, they just steal your money in a really sneaky way. And the worst thing is, because the market is so manipulated, the energy companies are literally making billions and billions out of this. Like an unbelievable amount of money. And it's
Yeah,
been taken from the poorest and given to the rich, which you're totally against. But yet, you still sit here and say the lines about climate change. You've all been totally duped by the industries.
No.
It's a total plan from the start for them all. Convince the lefties that climate change is important, so they'll accept wealth transfer.
I'm gonna meet that tangent with another tangent. Do you have the Drax Power Station, Drax Power thing where they're subsidizing wood chip growing in North America? Right, they're doing that. Fair enough. I take that point. Right, the problem. Oh, this is what I talk about on my other YouTube channel. Right, the problem with climate change, as is conceived, is that it is a genuine problem that we need to meet, which is where I am with it. But environmentalism historically has been really, really right wing and has been about getting No, it has been. It's been about taking the elites and rounding everyone else down and raising them up, right? This is like the organic movement. It's the origin of the Green Party with Blueprint for Survival, which is their kind of like
the Green Party or right
document.
wing.
At their foundation, yeah. Environmentalism going back, which starts with feudalism, essentially. It's this idea that it's natural and to have the elites be superior. And then when you get to the 1930s, these ideas sort of develop a little bit more in the context of European fascism.
You've spent too long in the Oxford Library. I'm just telling you.
No. I'm trying to. I feel like you always sound like a nutter when you try and succinctly explain all this sort of stuff. But this is what, like the Soil Association, right? The Soil Association, well, the precursors to the Soil Association, tried to overthrow the government in 1933 and install a dictator to reinstate feudalism. A man called Lord Lloyd, which then fails, and then because of that they leave Parliament because they've had enough of it, and instead start the Soil Association. But the idea of that is that they want to starve all the people in cities to death in order to reinstate feudalism, and then you have the elites. Like the whole thing is about restoring the aristocracy to a ruling position.
This really is a tangent.
Yeah, no, it is a tangent, but from that you get environmentalist rhetoric, which is all about land management, and it's about what's natural and all of this stuff, which really has nothing to do with emissions. So today, when you have climate change, which does matter, like I saw this at uni all the time. I got involved with environmental stuff, and you'd go to a meeting and they'd just be obsessed with like biodiversity and land management and
Oh,
stuff
we
that
can agree
like
on that. Load of
materially
nonsense.
these people knew nothing about anyway. But
Yeah,
also,
well,
it's
that's
not
everyone on the
emissions.
left.
And I was just sitting there thinking, emissions. Well, none of you are talking about emissions, which like is the
But
first thing we
emissions
have to
don't
deal
matter
with.
either. They don't matter either.
Okay, well,
Wake
I'm
up,
just going to
boy.
say,
What are you
before
talking
I finish my
about?
point, I'm just going to say that I disagree with that. And then I'm just going to finish off by saying, therefore, the environmentalist rhetoric today is coloured by its sort of history, which is a right-wing history, which is all about natural hierarchy. It's all about lifting the rich up and pushing the poor down.
Okay,
And
well, that's happening.
therefore, when you say these environmentalist ideas are being used to help the super wealthy at the expense of normal people, in many ways, that is what they were actually designed to do originally. And
And
the difficulty.
that's what the climate crisis is doing. You can surely
Well,
agree
I
to
would
that.
argue that that's what the climate crisis is being exploited to do. We do actually
Right,
have
okay,
to fight
that's
climate
fine.
change. The problem is
Right,
that it's
but
been
if the
hijacked by
reality is it's
dodgy
been hijacked
ideas.
and it's right, if it's actually been hijacked, right, and it is being used by people just to steal money off the poor, which it blatantly is, surely then you could agree it's probably a good idea just to move on from that and be like, nah, forget that stuff. Let's deregulate. Let's
No,
get
no, I
energy
can.
cheap again.
No, no, no.
Get the
Right, two
economy
things.
growing.
Firstly, no, have some ambition. Secondly, that won't
Have
solve the
some
problem
ambition.
because if you completely deregulate, right? Say like Drax Power is getting loads of taxpayer money to just burn wood chip, which is achieving nothing, right?
Yep.
That's bad. We should stop doing that. But if you stop that and then completely deregulate beyond those measures, then they will just do something else that's equally as bad because they can, right? I mean, freedom in the sort of Brexit sense is in most instances a freedom to be poor because the wealthy can rip stuff out of you, right? I mean, most people now pay subscriptions on everything. They pay subscriptions on like all of the different streaming services, which then get worse over time and show you adverts anyway. All of this kind of stuff, right? I don't want to pay rent for anything because that sucks. So we want regulation to stop that sort of stuff. So I feel at this point in the conversation that there's a happy medium. Should we be subsidising Drax Power to burn wood chip? No. Should we completely deregulate the entire energy market that will allow them to exploit the monopoly of selling that they have over households and just rip money out of them in a different way? Also, no.
Right. If you deregulate the power industry, right, what will happen? Will electric prices go up or down? Bear in mind that 60% of your electric bill is currently coming from regulation.
In the short term, it will go down, but in the long term, it will probably go up, which is what you see with water. It's very similar to the water industry.
That is the lie. That is the lie that we can prove is wrong, right? Do you remember, like genuinely, do you remember 15 years ago, the phrase cheap green energy? And they used to talk about having freedom from OPEC. Do you remember that?
Well, 15 years ago, I was like 10, so not really.
Yeah, but you're a nerd. Surely you were watching the BBC News at that point, right?
I played a lot of Minecraft.
That was their whole thing was we will get freedom from OPEC controlling global oil. We will have energy independence, right? Coming from a country which has huge oil reserves. Yes, right? Never happened. It was a lie from the start. There is no such thing as cheap green energy.
It could happen though.
If the EU and the UK is an economic basket case. I think we both agree on that. We can't have 0.1% growth at the same time that America has 6.3% growth. Look at the chart of GDP per capita and compare the US since the financial crash. That wasn't the figure
you said earlier. You said 3.6.
In this quarter, okay. America is over 4%.
I like Europe. I'm going to be straight up. I think
why it's totally failed.
No,
Europe has totally failed.
No, oh Christ, it hasn't. Right, okay. I'm gonna again try and answer that by going on a slightly different tangent.
What successful companies and industries?
Right,
what successful companies and industries do we have?
No. You're looking at this wrong, right? So there's like essentially, in my view, there are like two political positions. Right, one of them is, if we like Clement Attlee's position. So after the Second World War in Britain, we decided that we're going to have a society in which everyone can have a part in the society, be it through like state ownership of industry or their own as workers' ownership of industry, as was the case in the countryside with farms,
Communism.
and
Yeah.
and you're going to have the profit incentive still as a driver, but you're going to sort of cap the upper bound of what can be achieved, and you're going to lift up the
That's
lower
very
bound of what can be
communism.
achieved.
Yeah.
So everyone, it's not communism at all; it's socialism.
Mm.
So everyone is roughly within these bounds, right? That's like position one: make things more equal. Position two is Thatcher's position, and on a more extreme level, Peter Thiel's position, where you remove those caps and you just allow the rich to get richer, and if the poor needs to sort themselves out.
Yeah, but the poor don't get
Europe.
poor. This is the key point. The poor
No,
also get
no.
richer.
Right. So the thing with like Europe is that they are, you have freedoms as a citizen within Europe. You have protections that are afforded to you that you don't get in America. Have you ever been to America?
Yes, I've driven across America twice, done like 6,000 miles,
Okay.
literally been everywhere. I love
Have
it.
you been
Land
to?
of
You've
the
been to the
free.
whole thing. Do you actually like it? I went.
Basically,
It was
actually,
horrible.
oh my goodness, incredible.
No.
Incredible.
That could be a different. We can do America, yes or no. It's a different
Yeah.
discussion. But crucially, Europe isn't failing. I think for the reasons
By
that it
what
was set up,
metric?
but
By
because it's
what metric?
providing a lot of freedoms to I don't care at all
No,
about
it's not.
GDP.
We've had this discussion
Listen.
the first
You're
episode.
not engaging with what I'm trying to say. Like
Sorry,
myself as
I'm
a
listening.
citizen, right? I don't care
Yep.
about macroeconomic statistics at all. Right? They don't actually affect my life. It's just like a thing that people talk about in the press, right? I do care about my ability to access healthcare. I care about my ability to use affordable transport. I care about freedom of movement because it makes my life easier. This kind of stuff, right? And Europe affords that in a way that America does not, right? The reason that America is hounding Europe all the time is because Europe has protections in place for little people, like you and me, that stops big people ripping loads of money out of them. So people like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel don't like that because Europe stands in the way of them establishing a domination over Europe, and they want to dominate Europe, and the European Union says no. We have to look after the little people, the little guys that need protecting because they're not as big and powerful as you. So we're going to protect those people. And then they go, Europe's fails, no free speech. And then you repeat what they say.
You've lost the plot. You've totally lost the plot.
No,
is
that's
Elon
what's
Musk
happening.
trying to take money off anyone? What is Elon Musk trying to take money
I'm
off
just
people?
using him as an example of the super rich. But how this works, right? So you have the European model. We're gonna stay within agriculture. Agriculture is a good example of this because it's happening at the minute. So after the Second World War in Britain and Europe, small people, normal people, yeomen, right, were supported to own land. Right, and this means that they're not paying rent to anybody. Any surplus value extracted from the land goes to them as citizens. Right, so the settlement was protecting the small guys, but this means that super rich people weren't making that money. They weren't extracting that surplus value from the work that these people were doing. So ideally, from the perspective of a rich person, you want to get rid of those protections for all of the little guys so that you can buy up all the land and extract all the value from it, which is the purpose, the unspoken purpose, of the inheritance tax on farms and small businesses. Because what happens then is that the small businesses are bankrupted by a tax, which is government intervention, and therefore, I guess, supports your point. And then they have to sell up to the large corporations, which don't pay inheritance tax because they don't die. And then the super rich, all of the resources move up through the social ladder.
It's a bad thing, right? It's a bad thing then that the farmers can't afford to buy land and that the super rich are all buying it up. We agree.
Yeah, and that farmers are being taxed off it for the super rich. But this is the sort of American perspective.
No, in America, right? Land is dirt cheap. You can go to America right now and you can be a really successful dairy farmer. You can go and set up multiple dairy farms. It is a land of opportunity if you want to be a farmer, right? You want to be a farmer in Europe. You want to be a farmer in the UK. It is impossible. In Northern Ireland, land prices are now £30,000 an acre. £30,000 an acre. They've literally tripled in price in 5 years. Why? Because of the rigged, corrupt energy market, which is just fleecing all of us through regulation.
Yeah, okay. So
the land market in this country is no longer attached to the value of agricultural output.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to tie this back to
nonsense
what I said
carbon.
at the start, which is that when people say they believe in the free market, they actually don't, right? So, America, land of the free, they like a bit of free market economics and all this kind of stuff, right?
Yes.
But actually, they're quite happy to weaponize the state against poor people in order to help move
What
money
do you mean?
upwards, right? Which is what's happening with the inheritance
What do
tax,
you
right?
mean?
The
What's happening in
inheritance tax,
America?
right? Listen, so
That's UK though.
but this is you have America and Europe as two different
Yes. One
worldviews,
is
right?
one is
America
heavily
is the sort of
regulated.
like no, America is sort of like the Thatcher position, and Europe is closer to the
No,
Abbott position,
America is the
right?
bastion of free market capitalism. No one is going to disagree with that. It's
No,
literally
yeah, I
the
know,
one
but
country in the
Britain,
world which is like that. Yes.
but Britain is between those two, and has always been in a sort of identity crisis as to which way it wants to go, right? Which is why
Yeah, so
Britain is an interesting.
it's not a free market. It's not a free
Britain
market.
is sort of it's between the two, right? And Brexit was this question.
Between what's
Europe
the
or
other
America.
side? So you have the free market in
You have America,
and
and
then
you have
what?
right. You can either have a free market
Yes.
system which allows the rich to get richer, or you can have a social democratic system like we have had in this country,
Right.
like there is in Europe, which protects
Right.
at least
Okay.
small businesses, normal citizens,
Right.
kind of things.
That's
Right.
good.
That's what I'm
let's
trying to explain.
pause.
But no, I'm trying to tie this back to what I said at the start, which is
Right.
that there is a government intervention which assists the rich getting richer, right? So if there are rich people that want a monopoly of land, say, or they want to invest in land, it's not just a case that the small farmers go bankrupt and the big farmers buy all the land, right? That has happened to an extent since the war, but now the government are actually intervening and literally taxing the small businesses out of existence so that the big businesses can come in and take all that, right? So historically, the interest of the big guy would have been defended as free market, right? Or even trickle down economics. They compete, they win, they buy up the competition, they get bigger, then they get more efficient, right? But that isn't what's happening anymore. They've sort of done that, and now they're actually
Yeah, but you're arguing
lobbying
against
government.
yourself.
Not.
You're
No. I'm
arguing
saying that it's no. I'm not. This is what I said at the beginning. I said that most people who say they believe in free market economics actually don't, and are very happy to
Yes,
weaponize the state
Europeans.
against poor people.
Europeans and UK. That is literally describing Europe. They say they want free markets, but really they don't.
Do they say
They don't
that?
in any way.
I don't say that.
Well, then, so Europe doesn't have free market capitalism. That's fine. That's my
It doesn't
entire
have
point.
free market capitalism. It has social democracy, which is like
Right. Okay. That's
capitalism.
great. That is very helpful.
With caveats.
So if you look and compare free market capitalism, which is from America, basically, it's the only country that has it at the minute, or like Argentina is another really good example of a country that transitioned from communism basically into free market capitalism. Which is performing better? Which is better for its citizens?
But there's you have to think about things other than GDP, right? Another example of this is right. So
what is better in this country than America outside of GDP? What is better?
Just everything about it. Oh my goodness, I've been to America. But right, point being, no, at least that could be another conversation. America was wrong. They shouldn't have done the revolution, and they never got over it. Right, the revolution, in a nutshell, was about the fact they don't like government and the fact they don't like tax, which are two things that they still haven't managed to resolve. No, they have. You can't not have those things. Anyway, don't push me over the edge on America. I will just rant. You get like in the UK, right? So you sign milk contracts.
What has been a success? What has been a success of social
I'm trying
democracy?
to talk about economics, right? So
right,
I use the Dane law as an example to explain this. So in the UK, you produce milk contracts. Sorry, as a milk producer, you sign a milk contract, and sometimes they do things that mess with the contracts, or they just change it without telling you, or whatever. And then you have to just get more efficient because they say we're going to pay you less money. Suck it up, right? Yes. So then you have to become more efficient, which you do, because if you don't, you're bankrupt. But you're not making the money, right? As the producer, the money is being taken by the processor that's buying the milk, who's just lowered your price, right? So there is a difference between efficiency and profitability. Which bit of that do you object to?
Because right, so you're correct that we just get paid the world market price, okay?
But it's not quite a free market in how that operates because it's done through contracts.
There's no fixed price though. It's basically what comes in goes out. Most milk processors are cooperatives, so they're owned by the farmers. Okay, if anyone is distorting the industry, it's the retailers, and the retailers have got to their position of ultimate power because of a moat of regulations, essentially. Okay, and now they're too big to fail. But what is hurting agriculture, which is hurting dairy in the UK, is over regulation. We are
No, no.
not competitive
Hang on. Let
because
me.
of we are being paid on a free market, but we are not producing it in a free market.
Yeah. Okay.
That's
The
issue.
point I was going for is that it's sort of reductive to take a sort of GDP macroeconomic
Okay,
scale
what does social
productivity
democracy give us?
in order to assess how effective something is, essentially, and that you could be running a very, very good dairy farm
Right,
and
what
making no
metric do you
money.
want to use? What metric
Well,
do you
you
want to
could.
use to assess how
I haven't
successful
done
Europe's
research on this,
departure?
right? I mean, we can do
But
like
there's
my
no
own
examples.
sense of just as being a citizen in America. I know that they say it's the land of the free, but the police breathe down your neck all the bloody time in America. I was shocked how many police they have everywhere and how much they observe you as you
They
do
don't
stuff. Like,
arrest people for tweets. We do.
no, but they do have police absolutely, absolutely everywhere, and they go to
Yeah, but
parties and
that's because
stuff
they
and
take
tell
crime
everyone to go home
seriously.
again. It's just crazy, right? So, as a
Because
freedom-loving
it's
Englishman, I
illegal
think
to.
no. This is genuinely. I went to quite a nice part of America, Connecticut, which is where people wear salmon pink trousers, and my
Yeah, been
perception
there.
of it was that the reason Americans are so against an overbearing state is because their state is overbearing and they live with that, right?
No, it's
If
not.
you
That is
go, no,
insane.
because they pay
No
tax
one
and
has
it
ever
all
made that
just goes on
argument
the
before.
police. This is the
They
difference.
pay
Actually, I discussed
way
this.
less tax.
I
They
just yeah,
pay
and it all goes on the
way
police.
less
I
tax than
discussed this
us.
with Americans, you
No,
see,
it
and the
doesn't.
difference is that they have loads of police everywhere, right? And that is the
Oh
main
no, they
sort
have
of
police
faculty of
everywhere.
government that
That's
they have
not
to
a
deal with on
negative.
a day to
That's
day.
not a negative. How is police being on your streets a negative? What?
Because they arrest you for like having alcohol out in public or going to a
Yeah, that's
party,
fine.
right?
How's that a bad
So
thing? How is
okay,
having
right,
alcohol out
let
in
me
public
finish my
not a
point, right?
good
The
thing?
point is
Okay,
that it's
yeah.
restrictive and also patronizing, right? And that I feel that, myself going about my business in Britain, no more likely to commit a crime as I would be in America, right? But in America, the police are watching me all the time and they don't need to do that. It's just like in Germany. If you go to Germany, it's expected that people are good citizens and therefore they don't need to be policed. They don't have ticket barriers on their underground metro, right? Because they're just expected to pay because they're going to be good citizens, right? Whereas in America, the government treats you like a
That
child
might have
by
worked.
paying for
That
police
might have
everywhere.
worked. That might have worked in Europe before the mass immigration. But
Okay,
that's
I
not working
object to
anymore
that.
in Europe.
I object
And
to that.
that's why
But right,
people
the point
that's why
being,
people want police on their streets.
right, point being, in America, you pay your tax and that's what you get for it, right? But here you pay your tax. I perhaps agree that we have slightly too few police here, but we also get the NHS, right? And I'm sure everybody has had some sort of thing in their family where something that would have cost a lot of money in
The
America
NHS,
has been given to us
yeah,
literally
but the
for
NHS,
free.
the NHS totally fails so many people. It's literally
How?
collapsing at the seams
No, I
because
don't
there's
agree
people
with that.
lying in
I've had
corridors
lots of
for
very good
literally. There's people.
experiences with
There
it.
is. Well, there's some people who have good experiences, but there's plenty of people who have terrible experiences. And American
We still
healthcare is by
can go
no way a
private. I
good.
mean, the free
Yeah, but
market
that's what we
in
had to
healthcare
do.
still exists in this country. I mean, perhaps this is a good example
Yeah,
of
but
something we
so
can
I
both
have to
agree
pay.
with.
So I have to pay. I have to pay for private healthcare, along with paying a huge amount of NIC,
Why
which is my
do you
contribution
have to
to
do
the
that, or do you
NHS.
choose to do that?
No, I have to do that because the waiting lists are insane. My dad had to get a hip replaced, and the waiting list was like 3 or 4 years, so we had to pay for it privately. It's totally failed. So I'm now paying for someone else's healthcare and then having to pay for our own healthcare.
Yeah, but that
It's
person might be
total
less able than
nonsense.
yourself or more
And why is
deserving.
the NHS falling apart? Right? Why is the NHS struggling so much? Like the idea that junior doctors deserved a 29% pay rise, I find so deeply offensive. And yet they go on strike
Okay,
again.
you're on a
They go on
different
strike
issue
again
again.
because no, it's again, it's about the unions have so much control. The unions have so much power They can literally bring this country
Do you
to a
not?
halt.
Okay, right. Do you think that the function of a union is an element of a free market? Because, like, I mean, when I did all this sort of stuff at school, you have this idea that you have the labour market as such, etc., etc.,
Yeah.
and like collusion is bad, but you sort of have to regulate to stop it, etc. And but arguably, I think the behaviour of a union is very similar to the behaviour of companies on a lot of. In a lot of ways, it's sort of just like fixing the labour
Yeah,
market in a way
but
that a company would
you're
fix other
100%
markets.
correct. Unions can be like companies, but then whenever you have a union which has a monopoly, just like you have a company which has a monopoly, you get really bad results. So if every single doctor in this country is in the BMA, they have a monopoly on healthcare and they can demand whatever they want. And the stuff they do is totally insane. Like, no one even talks about the fact the BMA limits the number of people who can become doctors every year. There's a limit on the amount of people who can go through university to become doctors.
I don't
How
know
does that
enough
make
about
any
this.
sense?
I do know that a lot of recent graduates can't find work because they haven't got enough like older doctors to take them under their wing, which is very funny.
Because do
So
you know why?
that's
Why is that happening? Why is that happening? Right? That's
I don't
happening
know because
because
they've
everyone who reaches
emigrated.
the high levels, everyone who reaches a high level becomes a consultant. They get paid so much money, they then go down to a 2-day week. Like literally, it's like universal. So it's like, why do we have no consultants? Because they're all sitting 2-day weeks and then doing it 1 day of private healthcare on the side. They can double the money, still using the NHS insurance. They're living the dream. It's mental. Again, why
Yeah,
is it
but they are
happening?
doing
It's
something that's
happening
of great social
because
value.
are they really? I mean, farmers literally produce the food which keeps everyone alive, but I'm not sitting here demanding that I get some claps every Thursday, right? I think
Maybe you need
people
to
need to be
unionize.
realistic. Well, we tried that, but it doesn't really work in our industry.
Should form a
People need to
co-op.
realize people need to realize that it is regulation which destroys countries. It is so damaging. And
Yeah,
the
but
clearest
no, hang
example I
on.
can give you,
I don't think we quite dealt with the union point adequately because surely,
okay,
like, I kind of agree, right? I think we agree that competition is a good thing. Monopoly, which is the result of competition, isn't. So there's a point where you do need some form of intervention, but like, surely if you just deregulate, which is what you were going on to, like, what's then stopping a union forming? You have to regulate against the union.
unions are not inherently bad, but at some point you do have to limit their power. The tube drivers is another great example, right? The wages that tube drivers are on is now insane because whenever they decide to go on strike, the entire city of London grinds to a halt. Like that is blatantly obvious, the exact same argument you would make for a company having a monopoly. This is why you need some
Well,
government
yes and no.
intervention in both
I think that
cases.
there is a like economically, if we're just looking down at the system sort of dispassionately, I take the point. I think that the interest of workers is more significant than the interest of companies purely because there's more of them and people matter more than abstract ideas, in my view. Um, which is why I'm a social democrat because I'd rather lift up. I'd rather everyone's life got better than the rich get richer and GDP growth goes up,
Well,
kind of
right.
thing.
So if you can't have both, right? If your choice is everyone's life gets better, but yes, there is more inequality, the rich do get richer, okay, which is basically America. Or the other option
No,
is your country stagnates and everyone is worse off, which is the entirety of Europe, right? They're the two realities.
no,
That is exactly what has
I
happened.
can't agree
Which
to
are you
that.
choosing?
I
How?
can't
What? Give
agree
me an
to that
example. Give me an example of how it's not true. Give me a concrete example of how
because
that's not
I
true.
mean I've been to America. It's very very
No,
different to here. Right, the food
use
standards are
numbers.
much worse. I can't.
Food
I
standards.
haven't done
Where
research to
go
this.
to a
Right.
nice restaurant. Yes,
Yeah,
but
but that's just it.
you
If
can't.
you can't afford to do that, then you can't do it, right? I did notice that in America that the homeless people are much more numerous and much more aggressive than they are in this country because they don't have safety nets that we have. That's one example. Another example is I went to Appalachia, or Appalachia, as J.D. Vance would say, and I was
Great man.
shocked at the living standards that a lot of people have there. They live in
And what happened
what
in
in this
Appalachia? What
country.
happened in Appalachia?
Well, I
What
mean,
caused
it's
that? What caused that catastrophe?
just
It was the
economic decline.
It was the closing down of basically the steel industry. It was globalization, okay, which meant that their industry was not competitive. It's basically the coal mining industry in the UK, right? So this is an area, right, where I agree with you, okay? So this is a
Yeah,
departure area for me from the free market, which is that I do think some state intervention is needed if you're not going to be
protectionism.
competitive. Protectionism. I am a fan of
Okay.
protectionism. Okay, so I think we'll agree on that, hopefully, because we need to start getting some agreement here because we have to
Yeah,
come to
but
a
then that
conclusion.
kind of undermines your earlier point about Ireland, which is that they shouldn't have been allowed to do that because the other countries should have just told them not to. Which I think in the end is
Yes, well, they
basically
shouldn't
what
have been.
happens.
Yeah, but they shouldn't have been allowed to do it, but they were. It's insane that they were, but they were. Like, they took advantage of it, and they took advantage of it through deregulation.
In Europe,
Yes, like, so solution for the UK, right? We're in office at the start of 2027. That's possibly going to happen, so we need to seriously consider this.
yeah, okay, okay.
What
I
will you
I
agree
think
to allow
we
me to deregulate the economy?
no, it's
Why would you not? It's blatantly obvious that we are not free market capitalists anymore. And when we were,
yeah,
things were better. And I'll give you the protectionism
I don't
stuff.
think that shift has been as profound as you perceive it to have been. I think we used to be an explicitly social democratic country after World War II. Then we became sort of more right wing within that bracket, sort of Thatcher through Blair. Then we had Brexit, which is like, unleashed the true end game
Nothing.
Thatcherite ambition. And then now people like yourself are trying to take us even further by taking us out of the ECHR, which removes property rights, and
All
we
right,
become like
keep it
America.
keep it keep it simple. Keep it become like America, right? Like just think about the companies. Think about the companies that are based in America. All of the AI companies, the social media companies, the engines of growth. Okay, the engines of growth which raise everyone's living standards. What does Europe have? Europe has absolutely nothing. The
Yeah, but
German
you're
car
presuming
industry
that
is
trickle down
finished.
economics works, right? Whereas I
Yes, it
perceive that in
blatantly
this age,
does.
no, it doesn't, right?
What's the
People like
alternative?
Sam,
What's the alternative?
people like
Oh,
Sam,
your country runs out of money.
or
No,
like
think
Jeff
about it. The
Bezos.
reason why Rachel Reeves has had to push taxes to the highest level since the 1940s, which is literally taxing people into oblivion. The reason why she has frozen the cap at which you pay tax for the last like 5 years is because the country's broke. The country's broke because we don't have growth. We don't have growth because we don't have industry. We don't have industry because of bureaucracy and overregulation. If you
Consider
want people to be
this.
better
Why,
off, you need to deregulate,
that's not the reason we don't have industry is because we perceive that it would be cheaper to buy it from abroad and sell it all off, which is what
which was
Thatcher did.
really
But
stupid.
yeah, it
Which is
was.
really
Consider
stupid.
this though, right? If you have people like the OpenAI folks and Microsoft and
Yep.
Amazon and Elon Musk, all these people, right? They are very wealthy. You could argue they are wealth creators, right? But if you deregulate, so you're not taxing them very much, which is really what happens in this country anyway. I mean, Amazon
Yeah, but you still
don't pay
tax
very
them.
much
You
tax,
still
right?
do tax them.
Then they create their wealth, but the wealth that they have created is just stored by them and it's not redistributed. And they're not.
They
I would
are
argue in many
they
ways
are
not really
taxed.
creating that wealth, but just sort of gathering it from other people, right? I mean,
Yeah, but they are
Amazon Prime
taxed.
is something that people pay a subscription for, right, without actually owning. So Amazon just kind of collects that
And
money, and then
the tax from all of them subscriptions is paid to Ireland. It's paid to
yeah,
Ireland,
okay,
not the
but
UK.
yeah, I know, but that's wrong. Yeah, I mean, like if
Yes,
we
it's
were
wrong.
to adequately tax these people, then I might agree on some level,
We are
but that
collecting
isn't
zero tax.
that isn't
We
what
are
I
collecting zero
perceive.
tax from all of these giant companies because they move it to Ireland. So how about we cut our tax rates? Why are we not the ones collecting the
Or
tax?
regulate and tax them
No,
is more what
how
I would
no,
do.
you can't.
I think we
That is
should
never going to work. That's never
increase
going to work.
taxes.
Like regulation is never the answer, right? We're in office. I want to
That's cool.
deregulate the industry. I want to reduce taxes that will stimulate growth. Tell me I'm wrong. We
Well,
can
you cut.
do some protectionism stuff to keep you happy, right? I'm a
Hang
big
on, no,
fan of
you,
like protecting the steel industry, stuff like that. Encouraging
you,
manufacturing, even
you
if we have
cut
to
out.
subsidize it.
You cut out for a lot of that, so I only heard the end.
Oh, sorry.
No, sorry,
So
it's not your
we
fault.
get into government, right? And we're sitting across the table and we're like, right, what are we going to do, right? I want to deregulate the economy, cut taxes, right, and stimulate growth. Will you agree to that if I put in place protections for certain industries? And I'll throw you a bone, right? Because I agree with this. We'll renationalize the railways. What do you
No,
think?
I'm not agreeing with that because
What?
it's
How?
incoherent. Because
What do
you
you mean?
well, I think it just has to be slightly more formulaic than that, right? I think I will put a counter offer down. We nationalize like
Okay.
utilities, right, and infrastructure. So nationalize
Okay.
electricity, water, railways. You
And we
know,
get rid of the carbon stuff. If we nationalize electricity, right, and energy, I'll agree to it if we bin off the carbon nonsense. That's a good compromise.
oh, I think that
Think of
deserves
the
its own
trains.
conversation.
Think of the trains. No, just say yes. I'm willing to nationalize stuff for you. All I'm asking is you bin off the carbon
No, you're
nonsense.
nationalising stuff for the people. Um,
Right, we'll
right,
agree. You've
well,
agreed.
we agree on that. Right, I hadn't finished though,
Yes,
because
right.
then
Okay, good.
you retain the sort of profit incentive as the engine of the economy, but you need regulations that both protect industry, as you said, but also break up monopoly when competition
Okay, yeah.
fails.
Okay, that's
Right,
fine.
which
I agree with that.
yeah,
Right,
okay,
that's fine.
but
I
that's
totally
not
agree with
just
that.
deregulating. That's just I think a more cautious, pragmatic approach to deregulating where possible.
Right. Okay. So to summarize, okay, because I actually agree with that. Like genuine, not just trying to move
Yeah.
position here.
No,
Like
I thought you
we
would. Yeah.
we can nationalize industries like energy and the rail service because I love trains, right?
Yeah, I love trains as well.
And you're willing to compromise that we get rid of the carbon nonsense, right?
We can look
It's
at
all
it.
gonna it'll all work. It'll work. It'll all still be built, right? This is the thing. Offshore wind, solar still makes sense. It's just not transferring money from poor to rich, right?
We need it. We can discuss an energy plan tentatively at this stage.
Right.
I
Tentatively,
am
right.
prepared.
Okay. And we are going to protect industries that are vulnerable to imports. So I'm thinking like I really want to get manufacturing going again, right? Protect the steel industry. I'm happy that we pay to do that. Okay.
Yeah,
And we also break up monopolies. Again, brilliant legislation. That is, monopolies are anti-free market capitalism. So I totally
yeah.
agree with that. I have no issue with that.
That's all
So
fine. Yeah,
that's sensible
good.
policy. And you know what? This is the craziest thing. This is the craziest thing. If we actually done this, it would genuinely work. Like it would genuinely stimulate growth. One last thing we have to agree on, right? Let me make a pitch to sell you on this one, right? Tax cuts. Okay. I know that people think if you're cutting tax, that it's going to cost the treasury money. But history has shown us that when you cut tax, you stimulate growth, you stimulate capital inflow, and you actually end up with more receipts. And if you want real world evidence that the opposite is also true, if you push up tax, you get less money. Just look at what happened to Rachel Reeves. Will you agree
I would
to
need
cutting
to do
corporation tax
research
to
into
match
that. Like,
Ireland? Cut corporation tax to match
no,
Ireland.
I'm not
Ireland.
agreeing to that.
What? What do you mean? Ireland's
I
stealing all our
think
tax.
that,
Why are you letting the Irish steal all our
but we
tax?
should just
That makes
legislate
no
in such a
sense.
way that they're not allowed to
No,
do
but
that.
Ireland is running a budget surplus. A budget surplus, okay? Their
Yeah, but they
GDP
don't have
growth
any
is the
people.
highest in the EU. Yeah, but their GDP growth is the highest in the EU. Why? Because they dropped their tax rate. Why do we
No, no,
not
no,
just
no,
do the
no, no,
same?
no, no, no. Because I mean, to start with, Ireland is benefiting from the fact that there are lots of other markets. So this is they're not existing in a vacuum. Like and with economics, you make lots of presumptions, and you're saying, drop tax, get growth, trickle down economics. Right? That's kind of
Yes.
economic theory. But in Ireland, they've dropped tax, and then businesses from all over Europe and America have flocked to them because they get to pay less tax there, which is a slightly different
Yep.
thing, right? It relies on other markets.
Right. Well, how
essentially.
do we? Right. Okay. If you're not going to agree to, because their corporation tax is like 12.5%, which is
No, but
mental, right?
I also just
Would you?
disagree fundamentally with the economic principle of trickle down economics, because if you give money to poor people, they spend it, and then you get growth, right? So I would be more inclined to,
Are we
tackling
doing any
businesses
tax
is one
cuts?
thing.
What tax cuts will you agree to?
I think maybe that's another conversation.
A separate
I'm not
episode,
sure.
right? Okay, right. That's fair. Right. Taxation is going to be a separate episode, but we have agreed, and I can put this in our
I think we have agreed.
manifesto as
Yeah.
our policy position, right? That we are going to strive to be closer to a free market economy. Okay, so
Well,
deregulation,
we're
but
going to be.
two caveats. Two caveats, right? We're going to nationalize key industries
Yeah.
because that's
So
what you want. That's the
it's not very
compromise.
free market, then, is it?
I agree, but this is a compromise, right? We can't get
That's
everything we
okay.
want.
I
Okay,
appreciate that.
and we're also going to break up monopolies. Okay, I feel like that's a
Yeah.
good position.
No, I think
Also,
that's just what I believe.
and
Yeah.
the reason why, like, the nationalization is simply essential, right? Because we cannot compete with China in steel production. We can't compete with South Korea in shipbuilding. We can't compete with so many countries in so many different ways. But if we don't have the core capability to produce this stuff, we don't exist as a country. So
Yeah,
I am putting,
yeah,
that's why
I
it comes
agree.
above the free market principles.
But I'm very surprised to hear that, because I would apply that logic to agriculture, say, but you seem not to do that, even though it's your
No, agriculture, I
industry.
100% do. I 100% do. I just don't want to make the case that the farmer wants more money because it's not a good look.
No, that's
But I
very
100% agree.
diplomatic of you. Yeah.
Yeah, well, like, if a
Optics.
country can't feed itself, it's also screwed. Like, it's blatantly
Optics.
obvious.
Yeah, but then
That was-
I feel you're then essentially taking a social democratic position, which is that all nationally significant industries should be protected.
I'm
And
happy. I'm happy. I think globalization has been a total failure. Total failure.
but
And you can't have
that
both.
is kind of a
You
free
can't have
market
both.
thing, though, right?
It's literally, you do realize you've just agreed to Donald Trump's policy. I hope you've realized
No,
that.
I haven't
Slashed.
at
No, you
all.
have.
No,
He slashed regulation, and he has heavily subsidized
We
home
didn't
industries
really
to
agree
make
to
sure.
slash regulation. We agreed to reduce it as much as is practicable, which I think is itself a subjective.
Well, we'll use your words if you want, but you have just agreed to Donald Trump's economic policy. Boom, boom, boom. Well, thank you all very much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed that. I am very glad that we reached some sort of an agreement.
Yes, we're going to build a socialist utopia.
That makes us 3 for 3, which honestly is much better than I expected.
Yeah, I think a lot of your positions are sort of predicated on good government almost. I think you'd go for quite a left-wing government if it was competent.
If there's a competent government, 100%. Unfortunately, no one on the left is competent, so that means you're stuck with right-wing people. So, anyway, thank you all so much for watching. We'll be back next week with another episode. Hope you all have a great New Year's, and we will see you in 2026.
In a bit.
In a bit. Stop. Truth a puzzle, truth a prop. Spin it round, let it drop. Politically hopeless, no map, no compass.